Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my July 2024 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with my nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if you need to skip over anything or go back to anything, all of that is down below. On the way down to check that out, make sure that you're subscribed because sometimes YouTube likes to just unsubscribe you for funsies. And maybe hit that bell icon in case it actually does anything. As a reminder, I will also be updating my bookish bingo board from hell and my Read Queer all year for July prompts at the end of the video, so be sure to stay tuned for that. In July, I read 15 things for a total of 6,096 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 3,468 of those pages were actually about 124 hours of audio. I read some long audiobooks this month. The age breakdown for these books was 10 adult books, 4 YA books, and 1 middle grade book. I read 11 novels, 3 anthologies, and 1 graphic novel. This month, the biggest chunk of what I read was nonfiction and contemporary, followed by horror, historical fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, and mystery thriller. If you adjust by page count, you could tell the historical fiction was hella long. Most of these books were from the library, but I also read 1 I already owned, 1 from an independent bookstore, and 1 from a publisher. I read 8 hardcovers and 7 audiobooks. The biggest chunk of my books were in the $300 to $399 range, although one of those is not like the others. And most of them were also published this decade, but again, one of those was not like the others. Over half of my reads were by female authors, and my protagonists, where applicable, were a mixed bag. In terms of setting, over half were in the USA, but I had books from Russia, Mexico, Qatar, Sweden, Canada, and other worlds. In terms of diversity of subject matter, the biggest chunk were intersectional, and I had lots of queer reads as well as some translated work and books to do with race, disability, and chronic illness. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 2 3-star reads, 1 3.5-star read, 4 4-star reads, 3 4.5-star reads, and 5 5-star reads. Let's start with our lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? Now, funnily, with my 2 3-star reads, one of them is one of the shortest things I read this month, and the other one is definitely the longest thing I read this month. And ultimately, I decided the first one to talk about is When Among Crows. This is a fantasy novella set in Chicago that's heavily steeped in Polish folklore, and if I knew a little bit more about Polish folklore, I probably would have enjoyed this more than I did. I enjoyed it, it just was not my favorite thing this month, obviously. Essentially, we have this character who really wants to meet the Baba Yaga for a reason that you don't really know straight away, and this character is meeting mythological creatures along the way who live within human society of Chicago to kind of further this agenda. Even though this was very short, it had a few different twists and turns in it that I didn't see coming, so like I said, I didn't hate this, it just was not my favorite thing that I read this month. This next one I actually thought was going to be at the bottom of this list until I reviewed what I actually read this month and went, When Among Crows is just a little bit less my favorite, and that's War and Peace. You might wonder why I read 124 hours of audio this month, and 61 of those hours were because of this book, which I was actually listening to at least double speed at all times, but I always count the audiobook hours based on 1x speed. Because I'm not going to sit here and calculate exactly how much time I actually spent when I never listened to it at 1x speed. I very rarely listen to it at 2x speed, and by the end of this I was listening to it at 3x speed because I just wanted it to end, and I only gave myself 10 days to finish it. This is a book that was published in 1869 in Russia, and it itself is historical fiction of the Napoleonic Wars. This book has a very, very wide cast of characters, very few of them that I actually cared about, and it talked a lot, you might guess, about war. Although some of the philosophy of war in this was interesting, ultimately this was just way too long and I cared way too little, and I really only read it because somebody put it on the list of books I need to read before I'm 40, and I'm tenacious, and because there was an audiobook available from my library, I did the thing. I can say I did the thing. Let's move on. My 1 3.5-star read this month was Dead Girls Walking. This one was a really cool YA horror story about this girl who is going to a horror book camp with all these other Black and queer girls as well. However, unbeknownst to everybody else at this camp, she actually has a personal stake in the location of this camp because her and her family used to live on this land, and her father is a convicted serial killer. She, however, doesn't think he did it, so she's basically there, 1, because she wants to disprove that he did it, and 2, to find out if her mom is buried there. However, as this retreat goes on, obviously things happen. I thought this was really inventive and interesting, and I didn't know kind of exactly which route this was going to go, whether or not it was going to stay contemporary or whether or not there was going to be some fantasy elements to this, and I really enjoyed my time reading this one. On to my 4-star reads, the first one being Glitter and Concrete, A Cultural History of Drag in New York City. This goes back to the 1800s and talks about, you might guess, the history of drag in New York City. Obviously, this is not the only city in the world that has to do with drag, it's just one of very many, but it is very interesting to see drag specifically with this one focal point. It's also, of course, very enriching to see a piece of media about drag that doesn't just focus on drag queens, because there are other people that do drag, and in fact the terminology drag queen and the meaning of it has changed over time. Although this ended up getting repetitive every once in a while, just like name dropping these different performers and what they did and which clubs they were at and that type of thing, it was also very interesting to just see this huge history of drag in this one particular location. Next we have An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good. This is a collection of short stories about this one woman who is in her 80s. Her name is Maud, and when people get in her way, they tend to die. I believe there were 5 stories in this collection, and the last 2 stories were actually told from 2 different points of view, which I found really, really cool. Not only did you get to see an outside perspective of Maud and what people must think of this really old lady who just happened to be around this death that happened, but then you actually got to see how she pulled it off. Because in the first 3 stories, you see how she pulled it off, but you don't get to see that outside perspective so much of, oh, this poor woman, she just happened to be here. I found her a really interesting character, and I'm pretty sure there's another short story collection all about her, so I'd be interested to read that one as well. Next we have The Wicked Bargain. This one is about a non-binary pirate whose father made a deal with El Diablo that they would be fine for the next 16 years and then their legacy would live on, which to El Diablo meant, hey, I'm gonna come back when your kid turns 16 and you're coming with me, and guess what? Your entire ship is now also shipwrecked, but for whatever reason your kid has lived on and has to join a different pirate crew. This has romance, this has heists, this has pirate adventures, this has violence, and this also has a cheeky demon that's trying really hard to make a deal with Mar. If any of that sounds good to you, I definitely recommend you read this book. Next we have a book that I read in one sitting, and that's Several People Are Typing. This one is exclusively written in Slack chats for this one office in New York City. They're a company that kind of does the back end of advertising, so they're not advertisers, but they're kind of fixers, and they come up with different strategies for different companies on how to fix their public image after bad things have happened and that type of thing. However, we start out finding out that one of these characters is saying that he's actually inside Slack. So even though everybody thinks this is a bit and he's working from home, his consciousness has actually been uploaded into Slack and his body is just like chilling in his apartment, kind of comatose. Eventually one of the coworkers goes to check on him and ends up actually taking care of his body this entire time while they try to figure out how they can reverse this situation. And if you can believe it, that's not the only weird thing that happens in these Slack chats. This was incredibly creative and interesting, and I very much enjoyed seeing what was happening between these different characters, and then a character just disappears at some point, and there's only one person that remembers them ever existing. And then some of the things with the campaigns that they're trying to run just go absolutely haywire, and it's just an incredibly interesting read. Definitely pick this up, although if you have to use Slack for work, maybe you don't want to, because nobody needs more office-related nightmares. First, for my 4.5-star reads, we have I'm So Glad We Had This Time Together. This is an absolutely massive graphic memoir about this man who is an illustrator who grew up in the 1950s and forward. I'm pretty sure he was born in the 50s. I read this near the beginning of the month, so if I'm misquoting that, I'm so sorry, Maurice. But he grew up in and around Toronto, although he did spend some time in New York as well. He's queer, and it's his life story. This is an illustrator I'd never actually heard of before, but I was really interested to kind of get his take on things, and now I'm really interested to see if I can find any of his other work. Next, we have The Chance to Fly. This was absolutely delightful, and this was my middle grade read that I read this month. This one is written by a person who is a Broadway performer who uses a wheelchair, and she also narrates the audiobook. She also has a co-writer, but I don't know anything about the co-writer. I just noticed when I was listening to the audiobook that the name of one of the authors and the name of the narrator was the same, so I learned a little bit about her. This book is all about 13-year-old Nat, who has just recently moved to California and has to kind of readjust adjust to things in this new location. And although her dad really wants her to continue wheelchair racing because that's something she used to do back in New Jersey, I think is where they were from, she sees this flyer saying that there's actually auditions for Wicked the next day, and she is a huge musical theater nerd. Like, she absolutely knows all of the lyrics to a bunch of different musicals, and she would love to be in this one specifically because she knows there's a character in this one who is in a wheelchair, which would be perfect for her. However, her parents are kind of suspect as to whether or not she should change up her plans like this, and also she finds out when she goes behind their back and goes to auditions anyway that, of course, the character of Nessa Rose gets magically abled in the second act, so she wouldn't actually be able to play that character. Regardless, she's excited, she's auditions, she gets in, and it goes from there. And this is just such a love letter to anyone who's ever been in theater, because my god, there were certain parts of this that just I related to so hard. I miss doing theater like this. I miss summer productions where you just kind of cobble it together within a matter of weeks and put it on, and it's just great times. However, so much adversity comes in this, and I'm not going to wreck that for you, but I will tell you this is the first in a series, and the second one is called Let Loose, which makes me think that the musical that they're doing the next summer might be Footloose. I don't know for sure, but that's my guess based on the title. And yes, I do plan on reading that book as well. Finally, for this portion of the list, we have Silver Nitrate. This is historical fiction set in Mexico, and it has to do with a sound designer and an actor in the 1990s. They grew up together, they're best friends. She works on the sound design for different TV shows and movies, kind of on a freelance basis. Not really, she's supposed to be working regular hours, but being a woman in this industry was not easy, especially when dudes just kind of like to get their friends to do the work for cheaper and didn't use her services as much as they should have been doing because she was really, really awesome at her job. Her best friend is an actor, and he used to be very, very popular about a decade ago, and since a tragic car accident, he actually transitioned into mostly voice work, although he does get a gig here and there for physical acting in things, but those gigs are very few and far between. One day, soon after moving to a new apartment, he realizes that somebody else's mail was delivered to him, and he goes to a different apartment to give it to them, realizing it's the name of a director that he and his best friend really loved when they were growing up. This person directed these great horror movies that they were both obsessed with, so suddenly all three of them become friends. However, there was this one project by this director that never got finished, and our female lead really wants to know more about that. And it turns out that he has some of the film from it, but there was something a little bit extra going on with this film, and it has to do with the occult. That's where I'll leave it for you, because this was just such an interesting ride. You can also tell a lot of thought was put into the history of this time frame, and this was just such an interesting foray into cinema at this time and place. On to my 5-star reads, the first thing is something that I reread every year, and when I do a reread, I always put it at the beginning of my 5 stars, so that things that I've read freshly have a chance of being my favorite thing that I read that month. And that's my yearly reread of Me and White Supremacy. This is a book that originally started out as a 28-day Instagram challenge, talking about these different facets of white supremacy and making sure that people are educated on these different facets. And then it also includes journaling prompts where you're supposed to think about the certain thing that you were just taught about and how it relates to you and what you have done in your past and how you're going to move forward in life. There are many, many books on this subject, and this is not the only one that I've read. However, I did make a pledge in 2020 to do a yearly reread of this one just to make sure that I have it fresh in my mind. Next, we have another really long audiobook, but it's only 18 hours to the 61 hours from the one I talked about previously, so it seems like child's play almost. And this one is Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty. This one is all about the Sackler family, who owns a bunch of businesses, and although they like putting their name on buildings and different foundations, they don't like putting their family name on their businesses because their businesses, have some controversy, let's say. This really goes through 3 generations of this family, and the starting generation started out with these 3 brothers, the eldest of whom started out in advertising, became a doctor, and then used his background in advertising to start selling certain drugs directly to the public. And not everything that was said by him or the companies he created was accurate. Let's just put it that way. This is also the family that controlled most of the business of OxyContin in the United States, and a lot of people got addicted to this, even though it was said that people shouldn't be able to get addicted to this, and it's ruined many, many lives. It is an incredibly interesting and intricate history, and if you're at all interested, definitely listen to the audiobook if you're able, or just read the book in print or as an ebook, but the audiobook is also read by the author, which I always appreciate. Strangely enough, the next two books on this list are by the same author. These are the only two books that this author has so far published, and it wasn't until I was listening to the audiobook of the second one that I heard the name again and went, wait, I just finished a book by this author and now I'm reading another one, and I did not do that on purpose. The first of these books, and the first one that was actually published, is called Thirsty by Jas Hammonds. This book is about three girls who are all friends, although two of them are dating, and our main character definitely has a drinking problem, which is exacerbated by her girlfriend, and the culture of the sorority that she is desperately trying to get into. However, the other friend in this triad is trying to get her away from this situation, and it's honestly not going well. There's socioeconomic things going on, there's power dynamics going on, and there's a lot of alcohol abuse and extreme situations happening because of that in this book, and I just found it such a fantastic story. You really wanted to know what was going to happen with the future of these three different characters, and it resolved in a way that was ultimately very good, but very different than how they pictured their futures. By the same author, and penultimately on this list, I also read We Deserve Monuments. This book is all about Avery and her parents moving to this small town during her senior year of high school because they found out that her maternal grandmother has cancer and she might not be around much longer. Avery, just like the protagonist in Thirsty, is a mixed-race child, which is definitely something that has impacted her dating life and her life in general, and a whole situation that happened with her friends back in DC. And as she settles into this new home, trying to make a relationship with this grandmother she doesn't really know, she also learns a lot about this town and its history and her mother's history in this town. There's friendship, there's romance, there's this town theory that this guy actually had his wife killed and she's actually friends with the daughter of the woman who was killed, and Avery learns about her own family history that she knew nothing about prior to moving to this town. I really enjoyed the way that the different layers of this story were interwoven, and I highly recommend it. The book that I love the most this month is one that I pre-ordered. I knew I was probably gonna love it, and I was very much correct, and that's Bury Your Gays by Chuck Tingle. This book is all about Misha. He is a writer in Hollywood. He writes primarily TV shows or short movies, and they're generally in the horror genre. And as we go through this book, we get these flashbacks to these situations in his childhood that actually made him create these creatures that you see in his films or his TV shows. After he has a really big fight with the producer of one of his TV shows who basically wants him to bury his gays, which he is not going to do at the end of this TV show where he's writing the season finale, because he has perfectly laid the groundwork for them to come out and be in love and that be a thing that's just accepted. He starts seeing these people around town that have an eerie resemblance to creatures that he has created for different TV shows, and that's just not cool. In addition to this, I was already freaked out by the 8th or 9th page because it was talking about how Chris Oak, wink wink, is this actor who's up for an Oscar even though he's been dead for like 3 years because they've been using his likeness, and his AI generated likeness in this movie is up for an Oscar, which is unprecedented. Listen, buckaroos, this had many layers, this was very creepy, this was very interesting, it was steeped in horror fandom and queer fandom and queer baiting, and oh my god, I just really loved this. I'm pretty sure that Chuck just signed a deal for like 4 more books, and I am so excited for every single one of them, and I know nothing about them. I've read 3 books by this author now, and I've enjoyed every single one of them. As for the July prompts for Read Queer All Year, which is kind of an offshoot of the Queer Lit Readathon, every month where we don't have a round, we have one of these boards instead. This is what July looked like. For non-binary rep, I covered that with The Wicked Bargain. For a book about drag, I covered that with Glitter and Concrete. For sci-fi or fantasy, again, Wicked Bargain. You could also put When Among Crows in here as well. And for rec buy, I'm gonna go with Several People Are Typing because Audrey definitely talked about this book and I picked it up based on their recommendation. As for my bookish bingo board from hell, this is what it now looks like. A few things have moved on this, although I don't have any more spots that I've kind of been able to put my Bingo Dabber book on yet. I was able to add 3 more to the one that I've already completed, which is the 400+ page books. I added Empire of Pain, Glitter Glitter and Concrete and War and Peace to that. I also added War and Peace to pre-2000s books, as well as the International Square, which is non-English speaking country books. So basically I'm looking for translated reads. To that square I also added An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good. And for my 40 before 40 list I also added Empire of Pain and War and Peace. If you want to hear me talk more about these books, or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you've read any of these, or you want to read any of these, please let me know about that down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment, but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!